Harnessing the demographic dividend through investment in youth was the theme of the 28th Ordinary Summit of Heads of State and Government of the African Union held in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. The AU intends to drive this process through its Agenda's 2063 projection, which aligns with the Sustainable Development Goals. How do they intend to do this? They intend to encourage African youths to be in the front burner, to be on the front line of driving governance to the economic sphere, political sphere, name it, and through encouraging youths to be there to drive the process. Other areas the summit looked at are the developments, the Gambia, North Mali, South Sudan, Libya. And the climax of it all was the election that saw the election into the chairperson of the African Union Commission, deputy chairperson of the African Union Commission, and the 8 commissioners at the African Union Commission. Nigeria was vying for the post of the Commissioner for Peace and Security. On the program today, we'll review that historic event which lasted between the 22nd and the 31st of January 2017. My guest is the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Geoffrey Onyeama, who I had a chat with for the duration of this program on general issues and perspectives from the summit. Let's take a listen to the conversation. It's a pleasure to have you, sir.
Pleasure to be with you.
Beautiful. Looking at the central theme of the 28th summit, what are your comments?
Yes, of course. You know, in Africa, we have what they call a youth bulge. And this is going to be the challenge coming, that a large percentage of the population of the African countries are, below the age of 35. So clearly, in terms of developing policies going forward, this has to be taken into account, especially jobs for the youth and the various building blocks for the continent that will secure those jobs for the youth. There are a lot of challenges that the youth are facing in Africa, and we see the results of that. The irregular migration across the Sahara Desert, and a lot of them dying in the Mediterranean. So clearly this is a major challenge. And we have to invest in the youth.
Do we have a platform within the country that we can use this to drive the process?
You have the 2063 agenda of the African Union, and there are a number of issues, policies there for addressing the issues of youth. But also in Nigeria we do, we have a social intervention program in the budget that the government has just adopted, and a lot of that is targeted towards employment for the youth, education for the youth.
Okay. The emphasis was mainstreaming and coordination among African countries. How do you intend to do this?
You have the Agenda 2063, and the real challenge now is for the countries to really domesticate and incorporate that, developing targets and oversight mechanism to ensure that this is done. So this is also going to feed into the vision that Mr. President also has for a lot of those areas, economic development, education, women empowerment, youth development and empowerment, security, silencing the guns by 2020 on the continent. So all the areas that have been identified in 2063, a lot of them actually fit in to the policies of the present government. And so it's a question of, a coherent approach to doing this. And we're, following up on those in the budget.
The big one was the election. But before I get to the election, Morocco, over 30 years after, was readmitted into AU.
Yeah.
And what's the significance of their return?
Well, the obvious significance is that we now have a full complement of all the African countries within the African Union, then I think that it was a controversial situation in which we found ourselves, because there were some countries that felt that Morocco was in breach of some of the fundamental principles of the Constitutive Act of the African Union. And to mention two, one is that the recognition and acceptance of colonial borders, and also resolving matters with neighboring countries through aggression. And so some countries felt that those issues had to be addressed first before allowing Morocco back in. Other countries felt that no, that since Morocco had declared its intention or its acceptance of the Constitutive Act of the African Union without any conditions, that was sufficient for it to come back in. And then all the outstanding matters could be resolved from within.
While the King of Morocco addressed AU first time after return, one country mentioned about 2 or 3 times in his address was Nigeria. And he talked about collaborating with Nigeria in the area of agricultural development, smallholder schemes, talked about Nigeria in the area of economic emancipation. Was that strategic enough for us?
Yes, as you know, the King has just visited Nigeria, and a number of agreements were signed. And the one he mentioned today was the gas pipeline, across along the coast of Africa, which would open up the possibility of exporting Nigerian gas to Europe and so forth. And so I think for Morocco and for Nigeria, there's great potential in the economic relations between the two countries. And you're right, of all the countries he had visited in the region, he mentioned Nigeria. And I think that shows the importance that they attach to the economic relations that they have with Nigeria. And I think it could, it will be it's a win-win for...
But some other African countries may say, why Nigeria?
It's not just Nigeria. Morocco has very, very strong relations with a number of other African countries. And in fact, those countries really championed the cause of Morocco returning to the African Union. And they have, very, very significant levels of economic cooperation. So it's not just Nigeria. But I think that obviously, I think the point he was probably trying to make in mentioning Nigeria is that he understands that the readmission had split the organization somewhat. And if the biggest country, in the Union is engaged with Morocco, it's like a statement that that more or less Africa accepts their coming back.
Well, I know, it's an election. The big one is that the election held, and Nigeria eyed the seat of Peace and Security Commissioner of the AU, but we lost. What comments can you make on this?
Well, a number of comments, actually. First of all, I think we identified a candidate, the government identified a candidate that the government really felt had everything it took to occupy that position and do a very good job. And the candidate, I must say, presented herself extremely well throughout, and we as a country can be and should be very proud of her. She gave a very, very good account of herself. The strategy to get her elected was excellent. The resources were there, and and I think that everybody involved, there were a large number of people involved, visiting a lot of countries, did an excellent job, run a very good campaign. But in these kinds of elections to international organizations, especially where you have other countries competing, you're never fully sure of who's supporting you. And in this case, of course, we visited a large number of countries, and they told us they were supporting us, and that made us very confident. But in the end, of course, the numbers didn't quite enable her to go forward. But she was coming in second, running a very strong second, and of course it was a disappointment. But I think it was important that we stated the case, because peace and security is something that is very close to our hearts as Nigerians. Mr. President has identified that as one of his 3 priority areas. And, you know, and we would have done very well in that portfolio. But nevertheless, you know, we are still going to play an important role in Africa. And African countries are looking to Nigeria for leadership.
A good number of Nigerians across the divide felt very pained. But hearing from you, they may be reassured that all hope is not lost for Nigeria, even if we lost the election. What will you be telling an average Nigerian who says, why did we lose?
Yeah, well, yeah, it's a question we also ask ourselves. You know, but when you have a secret ballot, you can never be 100% sure of the result. So why did we lose? I think different people will have their different answers. I don't think that there's any sort of one obvious answer. But the fact of the matter is we take it in good grace, and we have to look at the bigger picture. And the bigger picture is not about, you know, it's about the continent, at least in the context of the African Union. It's about the continent. And Nigeria has is the only country that has a permanent seat, as it were, in the Peace and Security Council of the African Union. So as far as peace and security is concerned, Nigeria is very, very present and is in a position to influence peace and security issues on the continent. Nigeria is a member of the IGAD Plus, which is, you know, looking at the Horn of Africa and the conflicts there. And in almost all the conflicts on the continent, Nigeria is, you know, looked up to provide, you know, leadership.
So if we had won, we would have still maintained the permanent seat?
Yes, yes. It's, you know, it's a bit like the, maybe, well, not exactly like the Security Council of the UN, but it is the council in the AU of member states, a number of member states, that deal with peace and security issues. And Nigeria is a member of that. The
UN Secretary General, his very first session with African Union was very specific with Nigeria, talking about the fact that the generosity of the Federal Republic of Nigeria through Mr. President, President Muhammadu Buhari, to generously release Amina Mohammed, the former Minister of Environment in Nigeria, to serve as Deputy Secretary General of the UN. And he was very, very specific with regards to her wealth of experience. Is it a plus for Nigeria?
Yes, it's a major plus for Nigeria. Yes.
Could this be why they don't want us to take the commissionership of the Peace and Security Commission of the AU? It's
interesting you should say that, because as we were, you know, looking for support with various countries, some countries did say, hey, look, Nigeria now has the Deputy Secretary General of the UN. Nigeria has a president of the African Development Bank, you know. So that's what I was saying earlier on. You can never say for certain what motivated countries to vote the way they did. But on our Minister of Environment, Amina Mohammed, it's a big achievement. It's a big plus for the country, and I think it's yeah, it's a win for Nigeria, and she'll do a very good job. I mean, she has experience already, having been involved in the SDGs, in the formulation of the SDGs, because she was actually in the office of the former Secretary General, Ban Ki-moon. And the SDGs, which is sort of like an Agenda 2030 of the United Nations, and the Agenda 2063 of the African Union, have virtually the same goals and themes. And so she's going to be in a very good position, as that's going to be her portfolio, the implementation of the SDGs. And I think it's going to make it easier for Nigeria to be able to implement the Sustainable Development Goals and also, as you mentioned earlier, the 2063 agenda of the African Union.
The program once again is diplomatic ties, and our focus today is review of the just concluded 28th ordinary session of the African Union Summit in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. Stay on when we return for more on the program. Now, Africa Peer Review Mechanism. The chairperson of that platform, Uhuru Kenyatta of Kenya, sustained one message. Africa should make a deliberate step to solve problems by themselves. What can you expand on this?
If Africa is to be independent, truly independent, and really develop, we need to solve our own problems and really need to drive our development, because it's really naive to believe that other countries, are going to forego their own development to focus on developing Africa. So clearly that's something we as Africans have to do. And in this context, one of the major, two probably major issues that addressed was the reform of the African Union that was led by President Kagame of Rwanda. And I suppose within that reform is the financing of the African Union. As you know, for up till now, a very large percentage of the budget of the African Union, an operational budget and development budget, was financed by non-African countries, our partners. And of course, this is just not sustainable. Where you're a continental organization and your activities and your organization is actually being financed by other countries. So they agreed, the leaders, to have a new financing mechanism similar to the one we have in ECOWAS of 0.2% of eligible taxation of eligible imports. And it's believed that this is going to take care of the financing of the organization. So that's a step in answering what you just raised, that President Uhuru Kenyatta was saying about Africa being taken care and in charge of addressing our own African problems. And of course, in the reform of the African Union, there are lots of initiatives that have been taken there to strengthen the organization and to make it more robust, And one of the very interesting ones, actually, is that, as we know, with migration issues, and in fact, Nigeria is actually, we're supposed to be engaging now with the European Union on migration issues, mainly the irregular migration of Nigerians to Europe. And the European Union is engaging with individual African countries on this. Now, the African Union is saying no. They set up a body to be led by the President of Uganda, President Museveni, that if it's European Union, they should not negotiate with individual African countries. The AU has to engage with them. If there's an individual European country like France or the UK or whatever, that's fine. They can negotiate with individual African countries. So, these are all efforts to make Africa in charge of our development, our policies going forward.
Within the assembly, within some of the closed-door sessions, and even during media briefings at the AU, it will hardly finish without the mention of Nigeria. We had a session with the Commissioner for Peace and Security, and he talked about Boko Haram and the strides Nigeria recorded. And at the Africa Peer Review, Uhuru Kenyatta talked about some countries that have leapfrogged in some areas: education, ICT, transportation, rail, and what Nigeria was very conspicuous there. At the Gambia, it would have been, one would have imagined what the picture would have been if Nigeria was complacent or docile about taking steps to achieve what we achieved. But conspicuously, the narrative is very clear, it's in the public domain, that each time appreciations are offered, even within the AU, the tend to be downplayed on Nigeria, despite how strategic we are in this direction. We are privileged to hear within the media circle that in one of the sessions you had no option but to address the session why Nigeria should be downplayed on. What comes coming from this direction?
Yes, it's true. I took the floor on this matter because I felt, and the term I used was that there were historical gaps in the report in respect of the Gambia. Because a narrative that has been developing is that, the decisive moment with respect to the Gambia was the last, 9 hours. The last 9 hours before Jammeh left, you had the president of Mauritania and the president of Guinea, and he left with them. So a narrative was developing that was really what changed the situation there. So what I was keen to bring out was that this would not be fair to the process that had been ongoing before, and that in fact even that was part of that ongoing process. That the first initiative to engage, the earliest initiative that engaged with President Jammeh, once he announced that he was no longer recognizing the election result, was a team of 4. President Sirleaf Johnson, who was chair of the ECOWAS authority, President Buhari, President Koroma, and the former president of Ghana, President Mahama. And then after that, the summit of ECOWAS nominated President Buhari as the mediator on this matter, and John Mahama, the former president of Ghana, as his co-mediator. And from then on, President Buhari actually drove the whole process. He suggested that there should be a 3-track approach. And it was this 3-track approach that, that actually solved the problem. He said that the diplomatic channel should be maintained, and that we should reach out, that group should reach out to those leaders that were very close and that might have some influence on President Jammeh. And that was maintained throughout. And it was thanks to him that those 2 leaders were there in the first place. Then the second track was that President Jammeh wanted to buy time by getting some judges into the Supreme Court, because his Supreme Court was bereft of judges. There was only one judge, a Nigerian judge. And of course, the Gambian judicial system is actually almost totally staffed and populated by Nigerian judges. So President Buhari indicated that he did not support Nigerian judges answering President Jammeh's call to go and sit in the Supreme Court and hear his election petition. So that took away that option of him going to court to challenge the election petition, which everybody knew was going to be a strategy to just keep himself in power. That was the second track. And the third track was the military. It was President Buhari that convened a meeting of the defense chiefs of 4 African countries, and followed that up with a contingency plan that saw the deployment of Nigerian troops, Nigerian Air Force, and the Nigerian Navy that went to the border. Well, the Air Force was flying overhead, the Navy was by the coast, and then the troops, together with Senegalese troops, were at the border. And so it was President Buhari that was driving that whole narrative. So, yeah.
I must say, if I want to take you on this, we could take a whole episode of this program to do that. But one straight answer. What would Nigeria do mostly to countries that are always very aggressive or assertive against Nigeria, even when they know Nigeria has what it takes to take charge and drive the process at all times?
Well, I think it's about diplomacy. The fact that Nigeria is a big country, and I think our president brought this out very clearly in the fight against Boko Haram on security issues. The fact that you're a big country, I think, places on you a burden of being responsible, not being a bully, and not being overbearing with other countries. Yeah? And I think our president really appreciates that. And one of the points he made with respect to Boko Haram, he said that we were facing an existential threat with Boko Haram. But all the countries around us came together to support us, set up a multinational joint task force, and made huge sacrifices in that respect of security. And Mr. President said that this was only possible because we have good relations with our neighbors.
Your last word for the youths, because the 28th summit was all about youths, harnessing them to give them a better place to drive the process within the African continent.
My message to the youth is that the African leaders are now really looking at the issues of education and employment for youth, and to really utilize the resources of the youth. And the president, the new chairperson of the African Union, in fact, in his closing remarks, the president of Guinea, he said that he wants a report in the next session of the African Union, the next summit, in 6 months' time, a report on developments with respect to the empowerment of youth. And he also wants youth leaders to be there and to actually address them on the challenges that they face as youth. So the message is, the youth of Africa, your leadership is listening to you very clearly and really wants to engage with you.
It was nice talking with you on diplomatic ties.
Thank you very much.
I hope you are assuring me that we are not yet done on this. A part B will come, and I hope you'll be there to talk with us on that.
I certainly will. Thank you very much.
When the minister talked about youths of Africa, youths of Nigeria inclusive, on what AU is planning and trying to give them a bigger space to drive the process in Africa. I trust you had it interesting while the conversation with the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Jeffrey Onyama, lasted with me in one of the studios at the AU headquarters in Addis Ababa. That concludes the program today. It was nice having you as our guest. Till some other time. On behalf of all of us here, bye-bye.